all through Lent, we keep alive this theme of sin and need for repentance, and then God's grace healing us and giving us life. And it's very strong today. In fact, there's a linkage made in this gospel about just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the desert, and we get that in the Old Testament, when God sent snakes to bite the people because they were sinful and they died. And then he had Moses make a seraph with snakes around it in bronze, so that if they looked up at that, they would be healed of their snake bite. I have a little trouble with God sending snakes and biting and killing people, but I'll come back to that. So we make this linkage because now we are to look up at the Christ on the cross, who gives us life, who graces us and redeems us. And then the other great theme is the theme of darkness and light. And we're told that people choose darkness, which is hard to understand. Why would people choose darkness? Why do we choose darkness? And we all do. We may not choose some of the great darkness, but little things, all day long we have choices to make. And they're either graced or they're not. And so the Word of God today is trying to pull us out of this. It's all about seeing what we see. Are we blind? Do we really see? Do we choose to see into darkness where we really can't see? We trip and fall. Or do we choose the light that will help us to see the way? The second reading today, I think, is just the most precious part of our word today. It's more like a song or a hymn than it is a reading. And it was read beautifully, so I'm not rereading it for this reason, but I want to emphasize this. And listen to what grace does to us. Now, I mentioned to you that I have trouble with a scene of God sending snakes to bite people and kill them. That just doesn't square with my understanding of God, who is love. And also, I think that God is always gracing. Always. He has to. He's just who God is. But I think that when the scriptures were written, there was a sense of urgency that I don't think we feel anymore. I mean, our faith is 2,000 years old, and we come to Mass, and we're very comfortable, I think, with our routines and with our rituals. But in the days when these scriptures were written, there was an urgency that people had to turn away from their sin. And apparently, maybe there were huge just communities of sinful behavior, people not wanting to walk in the light. And so I think that threats were common in the scriptures, and threats of punishment and condemnation. And it was meant to wake us up and provoke us. It certainly does me, even when I hear them now. And so I guess that's one way of doing things. Probably they were more ensconced in this than we are now, but the idea of threatening people to change their lives or else they will be lost. And the scriptures are loaded with it. But listen to the change, what happened as our faith developed and we began to experience the real power of that cross, the power of Christ. Paul writes, "Brothers and sisters, God, who is rich in mercy, because of the great love he had for us, even when we were dead in our transgressions, even when we were dead, he brought us to life with Christ. By grace, you have been saved." And he goes on and he says, "For by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not from you, it is the gift of God. It is not from works, so no one may boast. It is the gift of God." What an incredible pronouncement to us. So that if we were to open but our eyes to see the grace of God active in our lives and welcome it, ask for it, seek it, be grateful for it, that we live in grace, that we walk in grace, that we share grace, then it seems to me we're getting what this word is about. And that is far better, to decide to walk in light and walk in grace than to fear condemnation. So I get why those words of condemnation are spoken, but I think this second reading captures it a lot more richly. Now, I told you last week that, again, you would be blessed with a second gospel today. I don't know how liturgical this is, but I'm doing it because we have two elect here. who are catechumens who will be baptized and confirmed and receive First Eucharist at the Easter Vigil. So today they will have another scrutiny. And in this scrutiny, again, we will pray that any darkness, any sin, anything that obstructs would be driven out of their life and driven out of ours also. We share the scrutiny with them, but it is focused on them. So this is the reading that is dedicated always to the Mass of the Scrutinies from John's Gospel. As Jesus passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" And Jesus answered, "Neither he nor his parents sinned. It is so that the works of God might be made visible through him. We have to do the works of the one who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made clay with the saliva and smeared the clay on his eyes and said to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. So he washed and came back able to see. His neighbors and those who had seen him earlier as a beggar said, "Isn't this the one who used to sit and beg?" Some said, "It is," but others said, "No, he just looks like him." He said, "I am." So they said to him, "How were your eyes opened?" He replied, "The man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and told me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' So I went there and washed and was able to see." And they said to him, "Where is he?" He said, "I don't know." They brought the one who was once blind to the Pharisees. Now Jesus had made clay and opened his eyes on a Sabbath. So when the Pharisees also asked him how he was able to see, he said to them, "He put clay on my eyes and I washed, and now I can see." So some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a sinful man do such things?" And there was a division among them. So they said, the blind man again, "What do you have to say about him since he opened your eyes?" And he said, "He is a prophet." Now the Jews did not believe that he had been blind and gained his sight until they summoned the parents of the one who had gained his sight. They asked him, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How does he now see?" His parents answered and said, "We know that this is our son and that he was born blind. We do not know how he sees now, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He is of age. He can speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews. For the Jews had already agreed that if anyone acknowledged him as the Christ, he would be expelled from the synagogue. For this reason, his parents said, "He is of age. Question him." So a second time they called the man who had been blind and said to him, "Give God the praise. We know that this man is a sinner." He replied, "If he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know is that I was blind and now I see." So they said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too?" They ridiculed him and said, "You are that man's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but we do not know where this one is from." The man answered and said to them, "This is what is so amazing, that you do not know where he is from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but if one is devout and does his will, he listens to him. It is unheard of that anyone ever opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he would not be able to do anything." They answered and said to him, "You were born totally in sin, and you are trying to teach us?" Then they threw him out. When Jesus heard that they had thrown him out, he found him and said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered and said, "Who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." He said, "I do believe, Lord," and he worshiped him. Then Jesus said, "I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see might see, and those who do see might become blind." Some of the Pharisees who were with him heard this and said to him, "Surely we are not also blind, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no sin. But now you are saying, 'We see,' so your sin remains." The Gospel of the Lord. You've all just gained 10 points to listen to another long reading today, so God bless you, okay? But it's a good one. It's a good one. The very beginning, we hear some of the difficulty in this passage because the Jews generally believed at that time that, for example, if you were born paralytic or deaf or mute or blind, you must have sinned, I guess, this baby, or your parents, because they believed that sin and destruction of our lives came about from our walking in darkness and not believing in God. So that's what they accused. But Jesus comes along and sees this blind man. He spits on the ground, puts the saliva on him, and with the mud on his eyes, tells him, go to Siloam, wash it off. He does, and he comes back seeing. And now the controversy erupts because people were amazed. He said, it's unheard of. I mean, blind people see sometimes, but it's unheard of for a man born blind that never, ever, 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 ever saw anything should see. And so, this seemed to be testimony clear that this was the Christ, the Messiah. But the split happened. There were some who believed and some who didn't. And the Pharisees, some of them, were the big leaders of this division. And they accused them of being in sin. They asked for the parents to give testimony. They testified but were afraid of them. They didn't want to be thrown out of the temple. But this blind man, now who was able to see, held on to this truth. All I know is this. I was blind, but now I see, and he did it. He put the light into my life. So, here we are with this great theme. Do people choose to walk in darkness? I think they do. I think the vast majority of people don't. I think the vast majority of people walk in the light and try to walk in the light. And I think the vast majority of all of our days, I'm going to put the number at 85%, maybe higher, is good. We say good things, we do good things, we want good things, we help other people by giving good things to them. But we all fail here and there. The sarcastic comment, the rudeness, that we won't forgive somebody, we won't ask for forgiveness, we aren't generous, we don't feel compassion. We make choices all day long, and sometimes they're wrapped around those things, a little bit of darkness. But we keep coming back. Here we are again today because we want the light, and we listen to the light, and we celebrate together and share the light so that we become more and more and more a people who walk in the light. However, I was watching the news yesterday, and they warned me, what you're going to see you're not going to like, so you may not want to watch this scene. It's terrible. So, of course, I watched it. And it was about a little boy, he looked about 10, in the Gaza Strip, who is dying of malnutrition. And they say hundreds are dying every day, children, because they just don't have food. And even though the United States is dropping all of these big packets of food all across the Gaza Strip, hundreds a day, it isn't enough. It isn't enough. So they focused on this one boy because he had some kind of a health condition anyway. He needed not only his meds, but also food. And he was the classic bag of bones, literally. His flesh was sunken into his body. His eyes were bulging out. You could see all of his bones. And he's lying there before the camera, dying because no food. Now, what kind of darkness could lead a person or a people to do this? You know, a comedy even that the United States is trying to help. They're building a pier now and all, but some of this stuff will take months. How many more will die just because there's not even food for them? That's walking in the dark, in the darkness. That's choosing darkness rather than light. And it's unbelievable to me that in 2024, we could act like that. You know, I was mentioning earlier this week at Mass about the 60 freeway being closed down the other morning because someone drove down that freeway and shot at a car and hit the man in the car, and they got him to the hospital. I guess he's alive, but who would do that? Who thinks of stuff like that? To shoot a man on the freeway, to try to kill him? And then what if his car went out of control? He was able to pull it over. But what if he had crashed into several other cars and killed people, killed children? Who does that? How can people live in that kind of darkness? And so this Word of God today, to me, is critical. It's urgent that we hear this so that we can numb ourselves out of any kind of numbness that holds us in darkness, even little things. And it's not about being perfect, it's about recognizing the grace that God is pouring on us right this instant. Right this instant. Just by having heard this word, we're graced. And as we take it in and listen to it, and maybe read it again today, maybe it will open our eyes to understand the power of God's love and what it can do if we open ourselves to it. The closing line of the second gospel I read to you says it all. After all of this back and forth between the Pharisees and Jesus, the Pharisees and the blind man, the Pharisees and the parents, and this criticizing and threatening to throw people out of the synagogue, and etc., Jesus says this, I came into this world for judgment so that those who do not see might see, like the blind man. That those who do see, like the Pharisees, religious men, that they might become blind. And it sounds weird, but that's the same message we heard when God was sending Moses to Egypt to free the slaves. He said that he would make the hearts of the Pharaoh hard. I used to be puzzled by that. Why would he do that? But the truth is that when we hear the truth or we hear the word, when we see truth, we either buy it or we don't. We either see it or we're blind. We either hear it or we're deaf. And if we're blind and deaf, you can be sure we're going to argue for that and try to prove it to everybody, try to make others blind and deaf. So Jesus says, so some of the Pharisees who were with him heard Jesus say that, so that those who do not see might see, and those who do see might become blind. The Pharisees knew he was talking about them. They weren't dumb. So it says some of the Pharisees who were with him heard this and said to him, Surely we are not also blind, are we? And Jesus said to them, If you were blind, you would have no sin. But now you are saying we see, so your sin remains. So those in darkness say we see. We see everything clearly. Liars! You don't. And we don't when we live in darkness. But the grace of God invites us to live in grace, to come forward and to find the grace that gives life and gives light to our lives.